My name is Sandra Scheller. I'm a daughter of Holocaust survivors. My mother survived 3 concentration camps, including Auschwitz. And I have something very unusual, which is the dress that my grandmother wore in Auschwitz. My mother was 10 years old in 1939 when, on my grandmother's birthday, which was May 14th, the Nazis invaded. Instead of cutting a birthday cake, they're surviving for their lives. And they went to the factory of my grandfather to find out what was going on. And when the supervisor was wearing a swastika, they realized that there were going to be problems. The first camp they went into was Terezin, and they took my grandfather to a different camp, and they didn't know where that camp was. At the time that my mother and grandmother were in Terezin, my mother worked in a children's garden, and my grandmother worked as a cook. And with rumors that they had heard, they thought that by going to a different concentration camp, that maybe they would be able to reconnect with my grandfather. They went to Auschwitz. When they got to Auschwitz, they were greeted by Dr. Mengele. They had faced Dr. Mengele 6 times. There was a bunker by the name of Canada, and in Canada, it is a pile of clothing and items from people that have passed or where they were separating them. My mother remembered that my grandmother had the striped uniform, but when that wore out, she was given this dress. I'm told I'm the only one who has something like this. And what's interesting is the mark on the bottom. It's the very first time that we've seen, normally it would just be the X and that would be it. And we don't understand this part. And from what my mother told me, every Friday, my grandmother would bend over and they would put this mark on her back, whether it was a brush mark, a stroke mark. All the buttons have been removed. And when I asked my mother why they would remove the buttons, she would say it would be so easy for somebody to commit suicide by swallowing a button. The dress at one time had a lining, and that lining was such a precious piece of material that it could be used for lifting yourself up to make you look younger, ready to work, because work made you free, Arbeit macht frei. 50 years later, when my mother went back to Czechoslovakia for the 50-year liberation, she ran into my grandmother's friend. She had saved my grandmother's dress, and she said, "I knew one day I'd be handing it to you." And then my mother used it as a teaching tool from about 1991 all the way up until now. My mother passed in 2018. There was something about speaking in a school and knowing that she was making a difference by sharing the dress and sharing her story and making sure that students knew about the Holocaust in her area. So we had a plan that 2 to 3 times a week, we would go into the schools. When my mother passed away, there were other Holocaust survivors, and you could almost hear them and feel them say, "What about me?" So I'm hearing it this way, and then I'm feeling from above my mother, and I hear my mother saying, "Sandy, you need to honor all the Holocaust survivors that are in San Diego." And now we have a Holocaust exhibit, which is on our 2nd time, called Ruth, Remember Us, the Holocaust. And getting the involvement of the Holocaust survivors in this project is really incredible. My mother had a saying, and I think other Holocaust survivors say this too, that the worst part of her would always be in Auschwitz. And she knew from that moment on that she was going to make the most of her life along with my grandparents. They were going to have no regrets in what they did and what they said and how they were going to talk to people. And as I watched my mother as she got older, she found something that I think was great, and that was the sense of security to be heard. The reason it's so important for people to go through exhibits, whether it's ours or the one in the Reagan Library, is because if we don't talk about this, then it will be forgotten. and people need to know the truth. And the more artifacts we have, and the more truth we have, and the more that we have from opposition to show, we have to be able to answer people that believe this never happened. Without museums and exhibits, we're in trouble. And that's why this is so important.